All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. If you're enjoying our content, please make sure to like and subscribe. We appreciate all the support. We're going to dive into Duke and Kansas here at Madison Square Garden. Marcus, I'll let you kick things off with your just initial thoughts on this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing to mention for this game is Darryn Peterson going to play, and based on the betting line, Duke minus 7.5. Based on like what Bill Self had to say, it sounds like he's going to be out for the immediate future. It leads me to believe that Darryn Peterson is not going to play in this game, which obviously changes the dynamic quite a bit because one thing we've had concerns about all along is Kansas doesn't really have a ton of primary creation on the ball outside of Darryn Peterson. So it really puts their offense in jeopardy, I think, in this game against Duke, which, it's a Duke defense that's been really good, second in adjusted defensive efficiency per Torvik, second effective field goal percentage defense. They've been really good thus far, and if there's no Darryn Peterson in this matchup, it really puts the Kansas offense in serious trouble. Because they're going to be relying on guys like Jaden Dawson, they're Trey White, Melvin Council, Cole Rosario is going to have to step up. They're going to need Bryson Tiller to make shots. They're going to have to play through Floyd Badunga more. And I just don't really like the way that shapes up against this Duke team. Not to mention, this is a Kansas team that doesn't really turn you over. And that's one thing on the Duke side of things, like the guard group, we haven't been super high on throughout the year. Although they have taken care of the ball well, it's still like, it's not going to get exposed here, against the Kansas team that teams have been pretty comfortable against. So no Darryn Peterson spells problem for Kansas, I think.
Cody, what are your thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, it obviously sucks that we're not going to see Kansas at full strength. I think this would have been a really fun matchup overall. Darryn Peterson and Cam Boozer going at it in Madison Square Garden. That sounds pretty fun to me, but ultimately we're not gonna get that matchup. But this is a Kansas team that they can stay competitive in this game with their defense. I know Peterson's one of their better defenders too, and I don't know if the numbers tell the whole story on this team's ability to force turnovers. It hasn't been great yet, but I think over the course of the entire season, I think they can be really good in this area. It's a backcourt that can still bother this Duke backcourt. Duke, that's kind of been the concern with them is primary creation, and I think just on ball talent in general. They've run a lot of offense through their front court of Boozer and Gungba, but can we trust Caleb Foster with the ball for extended periods of time? Caden Boozer coming off the bench. I do think it's a group with guys like Melvin Council, Jaden Dawson, like Trey White, and even Rosario, like they can, and guys off the bench too, Jamari McDowell and Marco Jackson all those guys are known as plus defenders. I think they can kind of get after this backcourt a little bit. They're going to have to ramp up the pressure, high hedge and ball screen actions, force the ball, out of their hands, just force them to make high level decisions that maybe I'm not sure they can make. But so I do think Kansas can kind of ramp up the pressure in this game, but ultimately Duke has a real edge in the front court in this game, particularly with their size. Kansas isn't going to be able to play their smaller lineup with like a Trey White or whoever you want to designate as the four, like just not having two bigs on the floor. I do think Bryson Tiller is going to be massive in this game. It's going to be a lot of Tiller and Badunga minutes trying to handle Gungba and Boozer. And I think it's really going to come down to, can Tiller guard Boozer one-on-one, or is he going to need to, or is Self going to have to bring consistent help and kind of be at the mercy of the Duke off-ball shooting in this game? So there's going to be a little bit of a chess match really on both ends of the floor, and I'm excited to see it.
Marcus, what's a possibly limited Kansas roster have to do to come out of here with a win? What are their keys to the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think Cody kind of hit on a big one. I think, even though they haven't shown it up to this point, they really need to try and force turnovers against this Duke team. They're really going to need to rely on their defense, I think. And we've seen Duke. They've kind of played a bit of a slower pace, the last couple of seasons, and I think Kansas needs to keep this a slower paced game, and force Duke to play in the half court and just put pressure on them in the half court and try and turn them over there. Because I think the lower the possession count in this game without Darryn Peterson, the better chance Kansas has to kind of keep this close and steal one. If Darryn Peterson were playing, I think it would obviously be a different story. But they're going to need to just rely on that, and I think they're going to need to also keep Duke off the offensive glass. Right? You talked about a Duke offense that they're 46th in offensive rebound rate. Kansas has been really good on the defensive glass, but like Cody said, they're not going to be able to play the smaller lineup in this matchup. But if they do try to, they're really going to need to limit Duke's second chance opportunities. I think those are the two big things, and then they're going to just need guys to step up, right? As cliche as that sounds, probably without your star in this game, they're going to need one or two guys to play significantly outside the scouting report on the offensive end. They're going to need to step up and knock down big shots. They're going to need to step up and make high-level decisions, high-level plays if they're going to come out with a win here, because this is a Duke defense that is no slouch, obviously. And so it's not going to be easy to generate offense, especially if this is a game where Kansas tries to limit possession count. You're going to be playing the half court more against, a set defense of Duke that's really good. So I don't necessarily love how that shapes up for Kansas, but those are the things they're going to have to do if they want to come out with a win at Madison Square Garden.
And Cody, on the flip side, what does Duke have to do to limit the upset and to come out of here with a win?
Yeah, I almost view this a little bit the opposite way, because I just think it's more of Kansas in their half-court offense. It doesn't look like it's in a fantastic spot, especially without Darryn Peterson. I know you alluded to that a little bit, but I do think this is a Jayhawks team that's going to need to get up and down to kind of generate consistent offense. I know that's not a great outlook against a better team, a more superior team overall. You want to limit possession count against the team that looks more talented, at least on paper, at this point in time. So I actually think it's Duke that is going to need to limit transition opportunities here, and they're always really good at it. And I think if they can do that, I think forcing, guys like Melvin Council and Trey White and Flory Badunga through the post to kind of operate as, just primary operators, I think that sets up pretty well for Duke here. And then I mentioned it earlier, Duke needs to take care of the basketball in this game. I do think Kansas has a lot of athletes that can really get after the ball, particularly Melvin Council, and then obviously the bench options that I mentioned. So, guys like Caleb Foster, Isaiah Evans, Harris, and even Caden Boozer, they need to be good with the ball in their hands when they have it. But ultimately, Duke kind of just sticking to what they've done on the offensive end, kind of running through their front court and, creating advantages and finding shooters off of that. And, I think they're going to be able to do that in this game.
Marcus, who do you have for this game?
Yeah, I'm going to take Duke in this one. Obviously, I would maybe consider taking Kansas if Darryn Peterson were playing, but I think Duke just has too much talent here. I think that Kansas doesn't have enough talent, especially in the offensive end. Guys are going to be in spots that they're not used to being. They're going to have to make decisions they're not used to. I just don't think they're ready for that against the defense of Duke's caliber. And I think Cam Boozer is just going to be the best player in this game and be able to kind of have a big one at the biggest stage at Madison Square Garden. So I'm going to take Duke to win this one. I say they win by 10 or 11.
Cody, who do you got? Are you riding with Duke as well?
Yeah, I also have Duke. It's just a few too many concerns with this Kansas offense, even with Darryn Peterson. They're 55th in adjusted offense right now per KenPom. If with Peterson not in the mix, he's a 31% usage guy. I think you have to assume that they get a little bit worse, maybe even towards the 75th or 80th best offense in the country if you want to rate it that way. So yeah, I'll take Duke. I think they win by I was kind of in the same range, 10 or 11. I'll say Duke wins 80-70.
All right, let's wrap things up here. As always, thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.